So welcome to this episode of Menopause Conversations. My name is Samantha King. I'm a strengths performance coach and a menopause coach, and I am delighted to have my guest, Jemma Fairclough Haynes, join me today. Hi, Jemma, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. So let me introduce you to Jemma, shall we? So Jemma and I got in touch because we were talking. I was on LinkedIn talking about menopause, and it struck me that there was a bit of a gap in the conversation for us, and it's around employment law. So Jemma, fantastically, is the CEO of a boutique law firm, Orchard Employment Law. You specialise in supporting employers, employees, employment law, contracts, policy, grievance, that sort of thing. So tell us a little bit about your work, Jemma, and how you arrived in this as a career.
Oh, well, I mean, we'd need a couple of hours to do that, but I can give you a whistle-stop tour.
Okay.
So I had always obviously wanted to work in law, and I was working in insolvency law at the time. I'd never considered employment law because I thought it was boring, but I was terribly wrong. It is not boring. It's really exciting. And the first time I became interested in employment law was when I was made redundant whilst I was pregnant. And I actually then went for a job. I just wanted any job, to be honest with you. And so I went for a job as a paralegal with an employment law firm. And the lady said to me, well, to be honest with you, I think you're a bit overqualified and can't really afford you. But I am concerned that you're being made redundant whilst you're pregnant. And perhaps you should pursue this. I didn't pursue it because I was just concentrating on myself and my baby. And actually, it was a little bit traumatic. She ended up being born quite early. Okay. And so I just focused on myself. But I did then get that interest in employment law. And it just so happened that my first job after coming off maternity, if you can call it that, because I didn't have a job, was in employment law. Fast forward several years on, I then decided to set up my own consultancy whereby we specialise in employment law and HR as well, because the two go hand in hand, and we work business to business, and it's really just about being clear and uncomplicated and supporting those employers, which in turn supports those employees.
Wow. It's so often I hear that in these conversations that people's experiences have been a springboard to what they go on to do. So that's a really, really powerful experience, isn't it? And that when we think about how women, you know, then after childbirth, of course, the next big chapter for many women is perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause. I guess that's the next chapter then in terms of that discrimination. I mean, and when we spoke previously, you told me that 400,000 women quit work each year. I mean, yeah. Can you add some context to that?
And you know that's devastating that women are quitting work because they are perimenopausal or menopausal. Because actually, and it's devastating for the women who are quitting work, but actually it's devastating for industry and for the economy, because that's a severe loss of talent, whereby, you know, I believe if we actually supported more women through this process, then we'd be able to retain more women, we'd be able to retain more talent, and the economy would be better. And so it is quite important that we as a whole, regardless of gender, are talking about menopause, because it's a fact of life. In the same way, my view is in the same way, you know, when children are at school and they're in their, you know, end of junior school or primary school, I call it junior to show my age. Reproduction, don't they?
We froze a little bit just for a second. No, that's fine. Yeah. So in terms of the education, you say something about reproduction. So is that
yeah? So when children are you know, sort of 10, 11, 12, 13, they talk about reproduction, don't they? But they don't seem to talk about what happens beyond that. And actually, you know, everybody's going to either go through menopause or know somebody who is experiencing menopausal symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's sort of this whole journey, isn't it? I know the government are talking about the women's health strategy, because it's not just menopause, is it? And it's not just you know, puberty right the way along. We can have fertility issues, we have pregnancy, we may experience redundancy through any of those time points. We just need to be treated fairly when we're in work, when we're going through processes. But the reality is, you know, with that, I think we bring much more power to women when we talk about also our own experiences. And I asked you before, you know, so are you happy to share with people, you know, in terms of your own concerns, or I suppose journeys that you've made yourself through your own your health wise, and how that's impacted your ability to do your job? And talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I don't think it's impacted my job, but like most women that I speak to, always surprises me how increasingly common issues around, you know, reproduction, fertility, etc., are with women. And myself, I've had polycystic ovaries since I was a child. I was diagnosed very, very early on, and you know, that has impacted me in menstruation. I've always managed to work, but I haven't felt comfortable when I was employed. I can talk about it now because I'm working for myself and I don't really care.
Of course.
But when I was employed, I would never have felt comfortable to speak to my boss or even sometimes my colleagues about the symptoms that I was experiencing because I had polycystic ovaries. And I know the same as there was another lady who, when I was working, she had endometriosis, which affected her severely, to be fair. And she had a lot of time off, but didn't feel comfortable to speak with our boss about the fact that this is why she's having all this time off.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you know, the reality is every time we have a period each month, in terms of pain, it's the equivalent of having a heart attack. You know,
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah,
Really.
the pain threshold is equivalent to having a heart attack. And we've got women coming to work every month, you know, throughout a menstrual cycle, and just carrying on. And I have had a lot of men say to me, if that was a man, you know, we'd know about that every time in the month, you know. And I think the important thing here is that women want to be at work. Women want to step up to the plate. Women want to have those opportunities, and our health shouldn't hold us back. So from your point of view, Jemma, in terms of the landscape that you operate in, I mean, what are you noticing? Menopause is, you can't open a paper for seeing menopause or seeing an increasing number of employment tribunals. First of all, what's your awareness of this landscape when we think about employers and menopause? Are we seeing more in terms of tribunals and things like that?
I mean, so there is definitely a shift, and I think that's a good thing. And you know, employers and employees are becoming more aware of menopause. And I mean, women themselves who wouldn't have realised that they are perimenopausal or menopause, they just wouldn't have known. But because this conversation is getting greater, we are becoming more aware. And in terms of what is happening before we get to tribunal stage, we're seeing trends. So I know recently, which is probably what promoted our conversations actually, was Sadiq Khan, London mayor, had said, well, in City Hall, we're going to have menopause leave to support women in the workplace. And I thought, well, that's all well and good, but then when are we saying that menopause starts and ends? Because there is this incredibly grey area. If you are relying on somebody to have medical evidence that they are menopausal, then that is going to be a challenge, because I know from friends that I have that it just hasn't been that simple, and it can take some time before they get a diagnosis from a health professional. So that's the first thing. But in terms of tribunals, we've been seeing it for a few years now, where there are various different claims which might be brought. I'm not saying would always be brought, because each situation is different, and so I always advise people to take these conversations as with caution, or with a pinch of salt, because every situation is individualized. But if somebody is not performing or having more time off, let's say, for instance, they're experiencing memory and brain fog, or they're just not as organized as they might have been, say, last year or 6 months ago, or perhaps they're needing more time off, and you are penalizing them for these symptoms. If you haven't explored whether that is due to something which is hormonal, then you might be discriminating as an employer, either on the basis of gender or health, which would be disability. And I think, and that goes for the same for any other women's health concerns which they might have as well. And I don't think people have really fully grasped that yet. It's just, well, everyone else gets on with it, or my mum get on with it, or I've never seen this before. And so it's kind of just seen as you're incompetent, or you need to have some time off, or whatever it is. But we are definitely seeing that shift. And the tribunals, the judges, they are aware, and they are making decisions based on discrimination, where they are seeing that actually this would not have occurred if it was a man, or it would not have occurred if this person wasn't menopausal, for instance.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more of this. I know that the British Menopause Society published a recent case study, actually, which looked at a council, and it talked about awareness around menopause. They chose not to do a policy, but they chose to run an awareness program. And interestingly, they said the biggest limiting factor was vertical gendered ageism. So basically, our white male counterpart sitting at the top, really not wanting to get on the bus to improve menopause for employees. And so the thing is, I think you're right. I think the more that this is coming into the mainstream, the press are talking about it, I think it's only a matter of time. And you and I talked before about policy, no policy. Is it a stick to beat people with metaphorically, or is it something that is actually helpful? And you have some interesting views on that. So could you share those when we think about whether people should or shouldn't?
So I think people should. My view is it's good to have a policy, but a policy should just be an opening. You don't have to stick to that policy religiously. But if you don't have a policy, then it might be that people don't feel comfortable or know what route to go to open up a conversation. And I mean that from an employer as well as an employee perspective. So from an employee, they might feel embarrassed, or they might feel silly, or they might feel unable to have a conversation about a symptom which they are experiencing, their own health, because they don't know that opportunity is there to have these conversations. Well, equally, from an employer, it takes quite a lot for you to say to somebody, do you think you're menopausal? Without worrying that you're going to be saying something wrong, or treading on someone's toes, or you're going to embarrass somebody, or someone's going to get offended. Because as well, as we know with menopause, there's not a specific age in which somebody becomes menopausal or perimenopausal. So, if you are, and some people unfortunately still equate menopausal with age, the upper end of the age. And so, if you see somebody in their 30s and 40s experiencing certain symptoms, as an employer, you might not feel comfortable to say, do you think it could be this? But by having these policies in place, I feel like it just opens the door. It's like opening the door to have a conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I suppose the other differentiation is, if we had to pick a starting point, people often ask me, well, should I start with policy first, Samantha, or should we start with guidance?
Guidance, yeah.
So again, is it interesting? I mean, often I would suggest guidance in the first, if you're just getting going on it, and actually, isn't that a lovely opportunity to collaborate with the people who are most affected by it? So forums, working parties, menopause focus groups. That way, then a policy then sort of it sort of grows with the organisation as you're learning things. But how easy is it to put guidance on top of, say, mental health policy that already exists? I mean, is that something relatively simple that people can do rather than going straight in for a policy? What do you think?
I mean, for the most part, it is quite simple. It does depend on the organisation, because some organisations have their own red tape, and so that can be a challenge. But in terms of from a legal perspective, as long as something's not contractual, and policies tend not to be, then it's easy to put guidance in there. But yeah, I mean, my view is interchangeably. I'm not against policy. I'm not against guidance. I think that there definitely should be something. It's good if you can collaborate and work with your staff at the same, so it's a team rather than just coming from one side. Yeah.
And
so policies can grow and change, just because you have a policy today doesn't mean that same policy has to be in place next week. I mean, we've seen that with parental leave, where we've gone from maternity leave to and paternity leave to shared parental leave. It's constantly growing and evolving, and that's how handbooks and policies should be.
Yeah. And so one of the commonest questions I have is people go, how can we ask the questions? You know, when a manager, for example, has concerns. I mean, I would like to signpost here that I think it's really important that we do have absence reporting that does reflect menopause and women's health issues, so that, you know, we're not just looking at a spreadsheet that says X number of absences, right, people are hauled in for some conversation. But actually, if we had some sort of system, I mean, how easy is it to do that within HR, Gemma, to actually have a system that reports?
I mean, it's very easy on paper. Theoretically, it's very easy. I mean, we use and we promote and we sell actually Breathe HR, which is an online HR information system, and you can put in various different reasons for absence, or you can allow the employee to put in their own reasons. So they can say, you know, runny nose, or they can say menopause. But remember, a lot of women won't realise they've got menopausal symptoms, and so this is the challenge, isn't it? Is that if you have an employee that doesn't yet know that the symptoms they are experiencing is menopause, or if they're being misdiagnosed for depression, for instance, or something else, then you're not, it is difficult for the employer to say, well, those are menopausal symptoms and those are not. So again, that's why the awareness, and I think having people like yourselves going into workplaces and talking about, you know, things that I'm learning, like if someone complains of burning tongue, that could be a symptom. I mean, who would have known? That could be a symptom of menopause. And so when we start to see those little dots, we can then, you know, draw them together and see the picture.
Absolutely. I had that. I was constantly at my dentist going, why is my tongue burning? Why are my gums feeling like I've just eaten like chilies? And they didn't know. But you're absolutely right. And just statistically, a woman will have as many as 8 symptoms. There are over 50 symptoms now within perimenopause, but a woman will have over 8, and it will take her at least 14 months before she gets a diagnosis of where she is on that menopause transition. And you're absolutely right, you're relying on the other end of the spectrum of the doctors who are aware and know what that is in order to get an accurate diagnosis. So yeah, I'm really passionate about that awareness piece, because I think for many people, if I can't tell you the number of people after a webinar who get in touch and go, oh my gosh, for the first time now I've connected the dots. You know, it's now giving me a compelling case, and actually then you can be more assertive. So, you know, I think it comes back to that thing. I think the more we see it as a them and us, the more difficult it will be. But the more we can collaborate together, you know, employer, employees, you know, great. I mean, do you have any advice where people can look, or where they should direct their attention if they are going to look to put a policy or guidance in place? In your opinion, is there a place that people can start from?
Because it's quite new, and it's not new, obviously we've been having menopause for donkey's years, but because menopause policies and guidance in the workplace is fairly a recent thing, I don't have any advice as such, but definitely speak to HR professionals, speak to professionals like yourself who know about menopause, and work. Make sure you're working within the law though, because that's the thing. There is a fine line between having this policy and guidance and targeting people.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And very practically, how can, because so many people say to me, I'm frightened, and these are managers saying, I'm frightened to ask the question. Do you have, you know, within the bounds of the legal system, what can you ask? And how can
you can ask the question. So you can, so when it comes to health, you shouldn't be asking people any health questions before you employ them. So you certainly don't want to be saying at interview, do you think you might be menopause? Oh, how old are you? No, we don't want to be doing that.
No. Okay, no, note to self.
No, absolutely no. But if you see people struggling for whatever reason, so whether that might be their work is changing, or they look like they're struggling in the office, or they're having more time off, you can have those conversations. Ideally, you want to foster a good open relationship with your staff and your team, with their direct line managers beforehand, just in general, with all staff, regardless, having that kind of open door environment, that good culture. If you've got that good culture and you've got those good relationships, and you start to see people struggling, you can then say, look, I've noticed you're not your best, or I've noticed that you seem to be getting quite warm in the office, or I've noticed that you've had a few more absences than you would normally have. What's going on? Talk to me. And then you can say, if you think, for instance, absences are going on for more than you would expect, you can say, well, would you allow me to write to your GP to find out more about just this condition? So you're not asking them about, when they were 5 years old and they had a toothache or a tummy ache. You're just asking about this particular set of circumstances. And if they allow you to, and it has to be done in writing and it has to be done properly, so always seek advice before doing so, then you can write to the GP and ask them about that set of symptoms or what the person is experiencing. The GPs will charge. I always say GPs do charge, usually around about £50 a page, and it's usually like one page and one line. So we're prepared to pay about £100 as an employer. Alternatively, get in touch with occupational health. If you don't have an in-house occupational health department, there are occupational health consultants which you can reach out to, and businesses which you can reach out to, and they can also do assessments, because it's seeing about, are there any adjustments you can make? It's not always straight to dismiss. There might be things you can do to keep those people in work and keep them at their best, which keeps your business at your best.
Yeah, because statistically, the minute we lose someone, it's £30,000 has just walked out the door.
Yeah.
And so like you and I both said previously, a million women leaving the workplace is a significant impact to all of us, because there's not enough money coming into the pension pot fund for us in our later years. We're not contributing to our economy, let alone the psychological impacts and the physical impacts to those people. So yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize you could write to someone's GP with their permission. So that's really helpful to know. But I guess like you said, I think that the main message here is about fostering that openness, that culture of collaboration and respect, rapport, all of those things, rather than just sort of landing in with possibly an HR personnel in tow going, right, we need to have a meeting. I think you're right, it's probably that. And so when you think about menopause in the workplace, Jemma, often people say to me, is it an HR thing? Is it a leaders thing? Who really do you think should be focusing on the topic of menopause, given that it is relatively new in organisations? Who should we be having around the table?
No, I think we should be having everybody around the table. I don't think it's any one person or one type of person. We definitely want employees around the table, as long as they feel comfortable, because that's the other thing as well. We can't be saying, well, you're a woman, you've got to go to this thing, because again, that can feel quite forced, and that's not a good thing to do. But having conversation, well, we're having this, would you like to attend? Whether you are a woman or not as well, inviting everybody to attend, or having where you might have your normal well-being workshops or discussions within team meetings, making that just part of everyday life rather than a big event. Actually, sometimes it's good to just build things in, because it is everyday life. HR definitely needs to be involved though, because HR are people. I know lots of people see HR as quite scary, and those that come in to do the firing and hiring, but actually they are there to look after the people within the organisation. And so it is important to have HR involved. And most HR people are quite empathetic, and they also will try and make sure that things are done within the scope of the law as well. So that's quite important. And then the leaders as well, because they are the people who are at the forefront of speaking with team members, it's important that leaders understand and have discussions in the same way we would with any mental health discussions. We want all of our leaders to be privy to those discussions, signs to look out for, how to approach conversations, how to foster good relationships. So, it's a collaborative thing.
And so again, a question that usually falls out of that, people love the idea of everyone getting around the table, but very few people feel they know who should drive the process. So who do you believe should drive the process if it's going to achieve all the things that we just previously talked about? Who should drive it?
It depends on the size of the organisation. If you are fortunate enough to have an HR department, then HR should be driving that process, because they are people.
Yes.
But then HR has to have the backing of the leaders or the owners or, of that business in order to implement certain policies or advisories, or
Yeah.
that they have to have the support. So HR can have the best will in the world, but if those that are in hold the purse strings or are in charge of the decision making, ultimately they need to have that support.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we think about where we would like this to end up, because it's not really just about menopause, is it? I mean, I can see a time very soon where we're going to need a women's health policy
Yeah.
of some nature in work, because it's so vast, isn't it? Fertility, miscarriage, menstruation, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, all of those things. I mean, how soon do you think people should be getting on this bus with this? Because I hear a lot of people going, well, there's no formal legal requirement to do this yet. So
Yeah, and we don't want to wait until there's a formal legal requirement. Let's talk about the benefits, because you can do things because it's legally mandated to do so, or you can do things because you really want the business to thrive and you want the workplace to thrive and you want people to thrive. And it's important to be ahead of the curve on most things, and I think this is one of those things which we need to be ahead of the curve on. It might not be, it's not mandated that we have these things in place, but if by having these things in place, you create an inclusive culture, even when people are then, and we're having a big issue at the moment with the Great Resignation and with retaining and attracting staff. But if you have these things in place, what that says is you're an inclusive and a compassionate employer, which will be attractive, more attractive than if you are not. So
definitely,
yeah.
definitely, I can see a whole, because there's more choice, as you say, with the Great Resignation, and people can choose. And I think one of the things that for me really shines a light on how big a deal this is the statistic that the NHS is 77% mainly women, or those that identify as being female and or have female hormones. 50% of that are at some stage on the perimenopausal menopausal journey. We can't afford for that generation to step away, really. We would never have got through a pandemic if that had happened. So we need to really sort of wake up to that idea that the sandwich generation are now ready and making confident choices to say, well, actually, if you're not going to treat me very well, I'm going. Because I can go and work for a private organisation, or I could do something else. So yeah, it is really important. And I certainly, if I went back into mainstream employment, the first thing I'd be saying is, can you show me your menopause policy? Can you show me your menopause guidance? Can you show me how you've raised awareness on that topic? What do you do to support people? And not just the women, I would also say the partners. And I think this is a really big thing in employment, that if we can get men, women, everybody who's affected, you might be a father whose daughters are going through it. It doesn't have to be a direct link to you, or you might just have some people in your department. I think the more we can have that representation, the better. So as we sort of bring things to a close, Jemma, obviously you've got a daughter too, and when you think about why you do what you do, what would you hope for her when her time possibly comes to navigate perimenopause in her life? What would you hope would be different in the employment landscape?
Yeah, I mean, I'd hope, and I think maybe it's moving in that direction. I think it's moving in that direction, but I'd hope that we wouldn't have to be having conversations such as this. I'd hope that, because it would just be part of everyday life, in the same way that people talk about maternity leave. They'll be talking about whether it's menopause leave or menopause adjustments or perimenopause adjustments, and that there's just more awareness. I mean, I'm already having those conversations. My daughter's 12, and we already have those conversations about, well, we spoke about periods, let's talk about when periods end.
Brilliant.
So
Exactly. There's no conversation too big or too small. And one thing that I don't know if this is helpful for you as well, is that I see lots of companies like Timpson's, for example, free prescriptions. I see companies saying, yes, we'll give you time off. I want to sensitize people to just what we're talking about here. This is not, we give people a little bit of slack for a couple of months, they get themselves sorted. Menopause is not like that. And given, for example, with the shortages in HRT right now, women are being expected, not asked, expected to be put onto something else. Now that causes huge amounts of disruptions to a woman's system, and it can take another 6 to 9 months. Yes, that's right, 6 to 9 months for them to stabilize again. So just because we've sort of feel we've taken women or their partners down a road, which is, yes, you're being seen by your doctor, now you're getting medication. It's not like taking an aspirin. It's not like taking, you know, a painkiller. It's not quick acting. You need to be patient as employers, and employees, because it can take on average 9 to 12 months to get steady on any hormone replacement therapy you might be getting. And I think that's the problem here as well. We need to manage people's expectations, because people sort of think, right, okay, now you're on HRT, you're sorted. And that actually isn't the case. I have a lot of women that it literally takes months. And here's the thing, when you go on HRT, you often feel worse, much worse, before you start to feel better. And so someone's performance can really slide, or they might be struggling even more. For other people, they might be absolutely fine. But I think, coming back to what you said brilliantly, Jemma, it's about having those open conversations where people feel they can step forward and going, look, I'm trying the whole doctor thing, I'm feeling wretched, you know, but I want to disclose that to you so any reasonable adjustments can be made for me. Because let's not forget, women do want to be at work. So what would be your final parting comments, your top bits of advice for people watching this who are either in a small business, a medium business, a large business, in terms of menopause and the law? What should they be considering?
I'd be saying just get informed. You know, there's so much information at the moment because it's a hot topic. Be informed. You know, learn about menopause as much as you can, about the symptoms of menopause and perimenopause, as much as you can. And then, you know, if you are going to make any changes, or you are thinking about having any guidance or workshops, just get some advice. Don't do it on your own, even with the best will in the world, because you don't want to end up discriminating against somebody. So take advice.
Yeah, and it's that thing, not to discriminate. So so Jemma, thank you so much for your time. I know you're an incredibly busy lady. I'm not going to keep you from your clients, because someone will definitely need your expertise. But how can people be in touch with you? How can they know more about you and the brilliant services that you offer within your business? How can they be in touch with you?
Well, they can contact us by visiting our website, which is www.orchardemploymentlaw.co.uk, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn, which is Jemma Fairclough Haynes on LinkedIn.
Yeah, brilliant. That's where I found you, and you came very highly recommended. So you're obviously doing great work. And so thank you so much for your time today, Jemma.
Thank you.